Good morning, everybody. I think we can start. Welcome to the workshop 7 of Smart MR project. Smart MR is an European Union funded project. It aims to find solutions for regional and local authorities in order to improve transport planning and transport policies. This last year of the project was dedicated to the impact of the COVID pandemic in transport planning. The project today is hosted by the Department of Engineering of Roma University. So welcome here in our department. I am Maria Lisa Nigro, an Associate Professor of Transport Planning. I would like to remember to everybody that the project involves several European metropolitan regions, Ljubljana, Helsinki, Budapest, the city of Rome, Porto, Barcelona and Gothenburg, and the related stakeholders involved in land use and transport planning. Okay, so I think we can start with the welcome session, and we can start with the video of Pierluigi Sanna, the Deputy Mayor of the Metropolitan City of Rome.
Buongiorno a tutti, è un grande piacere per me darvi il benvenuto a questo importante incontro del progetto Smart MR. Nell'ultimo biennio la pandemia ha messo in crisi diversi aspetti della vita delle persone, ma ha anche dato l'opportunità di ripensare il modello attuale di organizzazione delle città, che non è più compatibile con l'idea di sviluppo sostenibile da perseguire, ed infatti questo tema della mobilità è uno dei più rilevanti per la qualità della vita delle persone, per l'innovazione, per la competitività delle aree metropolitane, nella prospettiva di un progresso davvero sostenibile. L'Unione Europea ha colto l'esigenza di cambiamento ed indicato ai Paesi membri attraverso il fondo Next Generation e le direttive strategiche sulle quali costruire il futuro dell'Unione. L'Italia le ha recepite con il Piano Nazionale di Ripresa e Resilienza, naturalmente. La città metropolitana di Roma Capitale, nello specifico, ha accettato la sfida e sta sviluppando numerose linee di azione da completare entro il 2026. Sta redigendo, per esempio, il piano urbano della mobilità sostenibile. Su questo tema la nostra amministrazione ha scelto di applicare un approccio di pianificazione integrata, da sviluppare insieme con i comuni metropolitani mediante la realizzazione di numerosi progetti finalizzati all'inclusione, alla coesione, alla transizione ecologica, che tendono alla creazione di un sistema policentrico che va verso la città dei 15 minuti che il sindaco Gualtieri più volte ha evidenziato. Realizzare un progetto così ambizioso implica anche il coinvolgimento delle migliori energie nazionali ed internazionali. È una sfida che non si può vincere da soli. Il confronto non può essere che ampio e coinvolgere tutti gli aspetti della vita dei cittadini. Siete partiti dal tema della mobilità, ma la sfida che ci attende si misurerà sulle nostre capacità di fare rete e di avere una visione davvero globale. Mi congratulo con voi per il percorso che avete svolto finora, spero che la conoscenza che avete accumulato in questi anni non venga dispersa e che il partenariato prosegua in questa proficua collaborazione che ormai dura da più di un decennio. Sono certo che avremo altre occasioni di incontro e vi auguro buon lavoro.
So thank you to Pierluigi Sanna. Unfortunately, he is not here with us, but we have now Giuseppe Esposito. Giuseppe Esposito is the Smart MR project manager for the Metropolitan City of Rome. So I can leave the floor to Giuseppe Esposito. Please.
Dear partners, welcome to the 70th workshop of the Smart MR project. A lot has happened since the 2017 workshop in Rome. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed mobility patterns, modified the role of public transport, pushed towards the development of cycling and micromobility. Moreover, we are also engaged in the challenges related to the energy crisis caused by the conflict in Ukraine. This forces us to rethink metropolitan mobility planning to manage the change, strengthening the importance of ensuring high standards of public transport service, along with the development of intermodality and the promotion of active mobility and micromobility, also to cover the last mile trip. This change requires awareness about sustainable mobility, development of specific infrastructures and ICT platform to support mobility and the road network, promotion and diffusion of micromobility and sharing services to take a further step towards mobility as a service. The use of ICT platforms supporting mass can change the way people and the goods move from place to place and reduce dependency on private vehicles. The quality of data will be fundamental to achieving the goal. The information provided must be reliable and credible, so that the planned trip can proceed as chosen by the user. Quality of data means accurate data in real time. It's not difficult to imagine in a near future, also knowing the level of occupancy of each metro wagon and choose which one we want to get on, as already tested in Barcelona. In a wide range approach, land use planning and remote working can help reducing the need for mobility, resulting in less pressure over infrastructures, less use of personal cars, important energy saving, and last but not least, also less pollution. I'd like to conclude by saying that the best energy is the one we don't use. Finally, we'd like to thank Roma Tre University for their collaboration, scientific support, and hospitality. Thank you for your attention and enjoy your work.
Thank you to Giuseppe Esposito, also to speak about ICT, platform, micromobility. All these topics will be based in the following of our workshop. And now I would like to call for the Department of Engineering, the Director, Professor Andrea Benedetto.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's really a great honor and a pleasure for the department, first of all, and for me to host this relevant conference workshop about mobility after, during, I don't know, the pandemic era. So, first of all, I would like to introduce myself just in 2 words. So, I'm Professor of Road Highways, Railways and Airports here in this university. This department is one of the few excellent departments all over Italy. And in the last 5 years, we received many resources in terms of money, in terms of professors, in terms of researchers, in terms of instruments for improve our work, our research, and to be more excellent that we are. Actually, we are taking part to the next competition to be for the next 5 years excellent another time in the field of civil engineering. This department counts more than 2,000 students, about 80 professors and researchers in a permanent position, and about 100 researchers and professors in temporary position. So it is, let's say, a big department of engineering in Italy. And let's go just to the topic of this conference. I would like to put some ideas on the table. And we have observed, I think, some relevant things during this pandemic time that have had an important impact in many components of the mobility. I would like to make just a few examples of that. First of all, we have observed an increasing, a relevant increasing of pedestrians and cycling mobility, ranging from 15–20% to more than 100%, depending on the places, depending on the geography, depending on the weather, and so on. We have also observed a decreasing of traffic flow, of course, due to the lockdown, but also to the smart working. Third, we have observed a strong improving of e-commerce and e-service in general. And finally, but very important too, we have observed too a lack, let's say, and somewhere the absence of infrastructures, of adequate infrastructures and connection with the rural areas where a lot of people are now living using smart working and new model of life. So I think that all these opens a novel and unique opportunity to realize a new interconnected model that can fulfill finally the transportation demand and satisfy any different requirements. So this is the reason why I think that the floor is yours, the floor is ours. So good job, and thank you very much to be here.
Thank you, Professor Benedetto, for all the ideas proposed here on this table. And now I would like to call Professor Stefano Carrese. Professor Stefano Carrese is our full professor in transportation planning and is the president of Association of Transportation Professors in Italy.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the mask. Can you hear me? Is it already open, the microphone? Yes. As Disanigro Stalling, I am also the head of the Transportation Lab, the Laboratory of Transport System Engineering. Main activities of the Transportation Lab is acquisition of traffic data, both at macroscopic level, macroscopic, mesoscopic, and macroscopic modeling, design and simulation of land traffic, passenger and freight, design and management of sustainable mobility system, development of models for forecasting the parameters of transport network, development of road traffic simulation models, estimation of static and dynamic transport demand, real-time traffic control and management. So many activities, especially related to sustainable mobility. I was also for 10 years the delegate of the University for Sustainable Mobility, and we had a lot of projects with the city of Rome, with different companies. We promoted sharing mobility inside the university, different projects, and I think that after the pandemic, sustainable mobility is the answer to many questions that we have had before in the last year. I'm not losing any other times. I just give you best wishes for interesting and important conference. So thank you very much, and have a nice time.
So thank you again to Giuseppe Esposito, Andrea Benedetto e Stefano Canarese. Now we are starting with the technical session, and we have 3 speeches. I would like to invite the speakers of the speeches, Professor Marco Petrelli and Elena Colli, to come here with me. And please be free to ask questions or make comments after each presentation. So, the first keynote speech is by Professor Marco Petrelli, Planning Mobility Demand During COVID-19 Pandemic, the Importance of Data Monitoring and Advanced Modeling Tools. Thank you to Professor Petrelli.
Okay. Good morning to all. My presentation is very close to the topic of the SmartMR project, because I want to describe the experience that not only I, but also other colleagues from the 3 main public universities, the larger university of the city of Rome, Roma La Sapienza, Roma 3 of course, and Roma 2 Tor Vergata. We work and cooperate with the Roma Mobility Agency for supporting any kind of action to understand what's happened in the mobility system during the first year of the pandemic. I'm speaking only about the experience in the year 2020. And the analysis of the mobility, the capacity of understanding and measuring, quantify what is the new system about the trips and the different split modal between among the different modes, and also to propose new action. Very soon, so we have a long history of support activities, and the main purpose is about the analysis, the monitoring, and also forecasting the impact in terms of demand model. And we also provide support and a full cooperation with the Roma Mobility Agency for the identification of some measures good for respond to the new issue, totally new issue during this year. Sorry, we can come back. I want to show only 3 main things. One is about the first period, the very starting period of the pandemic, from February to April, which there is a lockdown, progressive lockdown, starting with some from the teaching activities and go to all the system of work and so on. The second one is an example of the new issue that the city of Rome have to take into account for forecast the people when there is in May 20 and 2020 or 2020. So there is the reopening of many activities, and we have to understand the level of demand, especially for the public transport system. And finally, we hope to understand what's happened in the system in the time that we think is the new normal, the September, October of 2020. But it's not the new normal because we have another year of pandemic. But in any case, it's very important to understand in this restarting period of all the activities what is the split demand. Okay, very soon you can find all the action by the local and by the national government that regulate the activities, the working hours, and any other things during the lockdown. We can go. And this is a first example of the analysis. We take into account all the possible data from the voting card data, from the turnstile entrance at the entrance of the metro, the subway in the Roman metropolitan system, and take into account all any kind of, and we can see some of the impact. Of course, at the end there is a very strong reduction of the trips, not only by car, but also by truck, by foot, by bike, and also passenger on the subway. And I want to show only very fast, there is very, very strong reduction. And there is a different speed of increase of the different system. As you can see, subway, trips by bike and trip on foot, especially in the historical center, there is no more tourists for a long time. There is also, after in May, we can see that there is a very strong reduction, not only in March. Differently for the trucks, that very good increase of the number of trips from March to May, and also by car. There is of course a reduction, but in this case we are speaking about a reduction of 25%, if we are speaking about the period of May. Differently from the public transport, for instance, in May we have also a continuous decrease, and the level of reduction is minus 77%. Okay, we can go. There is an example of the analysis of data. Is not only about the single level, but also a geographical distribution of this difference. As you can see, there is a general reduction in all the cities. We can go. And then I want to show something of the activities carried out for the estimation of the new demand. The point of the starting point of this new estimation is what's happened, if I remember good, is 4th of May and 18th of May. This is the two dates in which the national government decided to restart with some activities, and the Roma Mobility Agency purpose is to understand what's happened, especially on the public transport, because in this case we have to be sure that we have adequate capacity for the social spacing, because of course it's not possible to, in any case we are in a pandemic period. And we start with a very wide analysis of data. In this slide, you can see that we make a comparison between among the different action of the government, and after this we can in some way make an assessment of the different components of the demand and the reduction of the increase of this. As you can see, there are different colors. For instance, in yellow, if I remember, there is the students that you can see in February. There is no still present on the public transport system, but after the first day of March there is a totally deleted from the public transport system, because there is no school activities in presence. And as you can see, there is also a the first color. I don't know what is the color is quite complex to say what is the color, but in any case we are tracing that there is some people also in February starting, some people prudential behavior, they start to use not public transport but something else. And as you can see in the middle of during the March and the other months, as you can see, there is a reduction, and there is only workers obliged to continue to work at the end. Very, very few respect to the normal one. We can go. In this case, of course, we have to take into account all this data and try to make a forecast about the demand, especially on public transport, I can say. So we have to use the old model, the classic and conventional model that in the case of the Roma Mobility Agency, there is a system for the forecast of the demand from generation, distribution, modal split, and so on. But we have to integrate this model with some other activities to take into account this new condition. And so we make an analysis about the update data about the level of people using the metro, so we know the ridership before the COVID and after during the COVID period. So we use this information and we make a merging of this. I have no time for make a more detailed analysis about this. So we can go for an estimation about the components of the demand and the level of demand. About the level of demand, so even we know some, we use some data, something is about the different activities, the different opening hours for the different activities, because during this period there is the restarting of something, for instance, no bar and coffee till the middle of May, and when they have to open, not early in the morning, but only after 10 o'clock. So there is a quite complex condition. We know also the ridership at the metro, and the final output of the model is the forecast about the load factor on the metro system. Also in the other system, but the critical one, the main issue is about the metro system. And of course, the final objective is the compliance, the analysis, the check of the compliance with the social spacing on this system. I have 2 or 3 slides with some example of the results. This is the condition. It's not possible to understand the volume on the different section of the metro system, but we are speaking about, in some cases, 20,000 people per hour per direction in the morning peak hour, in many parts, especially in the center, and the total number of trips in the area of the city of Rome is about more than 150,000 trips per hour. The pandemic period, for May, we forecast a different scenario. Of course, it's not easy to understand if the people is still using the public transport, so you use different scenario. In one case, we try to understand what's happened with the modal split similar to pre-COVID condition. And this is an example. As you can see, in red is all the section of the metro system in which there is no respect of the social spacing. There is another slide with the minimal condition in which we forecast, we make the hypothesis about this scenario, the very low level of user on the public transport, 10% of the modal split. And of course, in this case, there is no problem about social spacing. We found that the social spacing is possible to respect till the modal split is 15%. At the end of every day, of course, we receive the data also from the metro entrance, and we can understand what is the real condition. In this case, it's not very important, but I can see at the end, we understand that generally our estimation is an overestimation of the people using public transport. Generally, is less than forecast. But this is another example of the impact and the analysis that we carried out during this period. This is the estimation of the modal split, taking into account what's happened after the summer of 2020 in September. And we, as you can see from taking into account data monitored on the system, not forecasting, we understand that there is an increase of the modal split on the private transport about 10%. So we reach about more than 70% of the people in the morning peak hour go to school or go to work or go for any other reason using the private car, and there is a contraction, a reduction of the users of the public transport. And this is my last slide. Some observation also useful, I think, for the make a synthesis about the experience of the city of Rome, in this case, during this period, pandemic period. First one is very, very good, I think, also for the Rome Mobility Agency, this cooperation, because there is a lot of things to do. There is a lot of things to do in very short time. We receive data, and after 10 hours, we have to propose a solution about the forecast of people, what is the changes in the demand mobility. So, and of course, in this case, the objective is very accurate and extensive monitoring of what's happening, and also very good cooperation for definition of possible action to react to this any critical issue. Second one, we understand it is very important to have data. So, by the Italian point of view, it's not a trivial conclusion. It's very important. In many cases, we forgot this important data, but we have, in this case, the need of new data, because it's not possible to use some historical series, because the system is completely different. If you want to propose a better solution, sustainable solution, any kind of solution, effective solution, you need some data. This is probably well known in Sweden, but I think also in many other places. But in Italy, it's not so. We probably understand this, very important. And it's not only important to have some very good monitoring, but we have also to use different data, because not always is possible to use only one single set of data, but we have to integrate different type of data. Another point about the planning and the understanding of what's happening in the specific mobility. There is also a need of modeling. It's not important to have the data, but you have to take something, and if you want to forecast, the forecast is not only 1 minute after the in real time, you have also to forecast something for the next day, for the next week, for the next month, and you have to propose something for make more sustainable the system. You need to something as modeling, because you can go for robust and more adequate analysis of the phenomena and to better understand what's happening. Finally, some final conclusion, some observation about the public transport system. We understand that there is a lot of problem. We know also before, but we understand that now probably is the time to use all these criticalities, information, and problem that we found. And the main, as you can see from my slide, the main problem is about the difficulty in adaptation of the public transport system to service to the different demand, a different issue every day. And this is, for instance, very simple, but there is a lot of problem. One, for instance, about the city of Rome is about the use of the driver. Of course, there is a national condition that you have to go to home if you have some children, because the children are not at school but at home. And so there is a reduction of drivers, and this reduction is not every day the same, but every day changes. And this is practically impossible for operators working on public transport to find a solution. This is one example. The second one is the money. There is a critical reduction for more than 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, 8 months, 1 year, we can say, in which there is a very large reduction of the entrance of the revenue. And this is a complex problem to make all the normal system. And of course, by our point of view, we understand that there is the time to go forward, to make something new, because there is the need of more tools, more system for make a better design. The design is at the different level, from the rules to the frequency to the scheduling of the drivers, to all the other things, because there is a need of make a better use of the resource, especially for the public transport system. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Professor Petrelli. Thank you very much. It's very interesting work and collaboration between Rome Mobility Agency and the University of Roma. It calls for the adoption of all our standard transport models, but also how we can adapt these models to take into account COVID, the need for data, the need for the flexibility of public transportation. Thus, we are a little bit late, so I think we can concentrate the questions and comments during the working group later. And now I think it's my turn. Okay, so I'm going to present this work about walking and cycling cities, how the micromobility revolution impacts mobility plans. And I would like to start this presentation with a picture. This is the picture. Yes, this is the city of Rome, completely empty during the lockdown phase. Because COVID-19 was, of course, a disruptive event, changing our mobility habits and our mobility behaviors. And most of these behavioral habits still exist, I think, to smart working, but also here we are in a university, to blended learning. And this type of changes modify also the way we have to deal with, for example, standard models. Let's think to commuting trips. They are not a function only of number of activities and employees on the territory, but they are also a function, for example, of policies and issues about flexibility in time and space. And in the last 2 years, we have also a strong reduction on the adoption of public transport and the mass transit system, mainly because they are perceived as unsafe, but also because, and we know this also in the city of Rome, we assist to a low reliability of the services. Thus, the low reliability together with the perception of unsafety brings to a strong reduction of its adoption. However, there is a partial recovery. These are the data of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Sustainable Mobility. So we can start to work again in our public transportation network. And in the meanwhile, there is a strong rise of micromobility solutions. With micromobility, I mean also active modes, for example, walking or standard bikes, but also all the electric micromobility solutions, both in ownership or as shared services, as electric bikes or electric scooters. We can see this rise, for example, analyzing the data of the National Observatory of the Sharing Mobility, as well as the number of sales in terms of bikes and e-bikes, and also about the sales of electric scooters. And together with this rise of micromobility, local administration started to speak about the concept of 15 minutes city. That is the rethinking of urban spaces, thus finding everything within 15 minutes walking. 15 minutes walking, but why not also 15 minutes cycling or 15 minutes by micromobility in general. And this is a concept very similar to the concept of transit-oriented development, because in the last case, we need to find our transit station in a catchment area of about 15 minutes. So they are very related. So, how can we work in our planning instrument in order to accommodate the rise of micromobility, not only to cover origin destination trips, but also longer trips in terms of multimodality between micromobility and public transport? Well, now I would like to suggest several measures, several elements on which we can work in our planning instrument. For example, the street layout and density. They are very important for the rise of micromobility. And density not only as a quantity, but also as a distribution on our urban area. And of course, if we work on street layout and density together with the proximity to transit station, we can go toward a transit-oriented development, because until there is an access space that requires walking, cycling, micromobility in general, a transit-friendly environment must also be pedestrian, and let me add also cycling and micromobility friendly. The land use and the proximity to transit station underlines that there is the possibility to use micromobility solutions also for commuting trips, and this is a very important factor, because if we analyze the characteristic of land use of some zones, or for example in the city of Rome, these are some elaboration from the data of the DOT operator. DOT operator is an operator of electric scooters and electric bikes here in the city of Rome. We have a different behavior in terms of number of distribution of rides during the week as a function of land use and as a function of the presence of a transit station. For example, in zones like Flaminio, Piazza del Popolo and Colosseo, there are mainly touristic zones, there is a very high number of rides during the weekend. It means that the rides are mainly adopted for leisure. However, if we see the behavior in the zones of Termini, where the main station of the transit of the metro lines is located, or if we see the behaviors in Piazza Mazzini, where there is a very high density of activities and homogeneous distribution of activities, these trips, these rides, are mostly distributed during all the weekdays. It means that there is a possibility also to adopt electric micromobility, scooters and bikes, thus micromobility in general, as a function of land use and proximity of transit stations. And this is a result of elaboration of the real data. But if we speak of micromobility, we have to speak of safety. Safety is fundamental for the adoption of micromobility. These are elaboration of a survey that we conduct to different inhabitants of the city of Rome during November 2020, January 2021. And firstly, you can see that there is a different perception of safety between, for example, drivers of electric scooters with respect to drivers of bikes and electric bikes, because they are very different transport modes, and also the way you drive it is very different. electric scooters calls for a higher need of safety conditions. If we are able to guarantee high level of safety in terms of infrastructures, as for example adoption of protected bike lanes, we are able to obtain about a 40% of propensity to use electric scooters, bikes and electric bikes. And if we analyze the average probability of shifting toward micromobility, in this case toward electric scooters, bikes and e-bikes, we can see that in the higher level of safety, thus with protected bike lanes, we have about an average probability of 30%. While in case of any infrastructure condition and traffic condition, this percentage decreases to about 4%. So we need, of course, to guarantee safety conditions. We need bike lanes, but we need to optimal connection of the bike lanes, because actually we have a fragmented conditions. In the future planning horizon, different kilometers of infrastructure are forecasted, but we have to find the optimal way of connecting them. And think to this point, if we move also to regional level, where we can connect the city level bike lanes to, for example, touristic pathways in our metropolitan city region. Okay, so we speak about the need to realize walking, bicycle, micromobility oriented development. We speak about realize the correct land use to work in terms of activities and location with respect to transit stations. But we speak about safety and the need to connect, to optimal connection of the bike lanes. But how? There are models or methods that can be adopted by planners in order to implement this type of measures, in order to rise the evolution of micromobility. I can say yes, okay, about the possibility to realize walking, micromobility, cycling environment. In the literature, several key performance indicators exist. They are mainly proximity measures, connectivity measures. These one are the mostly adopted, the number and density of nodes, the number and density of links. It remember us the concept of street layout, the dimension of the blocks, the number of circuits, and also the quality measure. For example, if we are in presence of a multi-lane infrastructure or not. So these key performance indicators aims transport planner and urban planner to realize walking, cycling and micromobility oriented development. But the last important thing is that we have benchmark values. So we have some reference values that we can adopt to understand where we are moving to, if we are moving to micromobility oriented development or not. This is very important. I would like to show you some example in the city of Rome. This is the case of the Tintoretto district, where you can see the dimension of the blocks. The street layout is very irregular, the dimension of the infrastructures. Okay, think to this example and then move here to Piazza Bologna, where we have in the center of the district, a transit station located, the station of Bologna, that is an important metro station, and see also the radial structure of the network and the dimension of the blocks. To understand which one is more walking, cycling, and micro-mobility oriented. But our KPI, our benchmark values can help us in understanding where we are going in terms of urban planning. Okay, now about the possibility to work on density and work on the location of transit station. Okay, here I would like to propose a model that is a land-use transport interaction model that work in this way, for example, concentrating activities in the surrounding of the mass transit stations. In this case, we are not working on moving residences, but only activities. That is something that we can do in terms of planning. And we are moving these activities near the mass transit station, but where there is available capacity of the transit system. In this way, we can use this available capacity in order to guarantee the adoption of our mass transit system. This is a method proposed by Brandi et al. In 2015. It was tested in the case of the city of Rome. And the result were the moving of about 9,600 employees all around some of the metro stations, with a residual capacity reduction of the metro network of about 33%. Another point, another suggestion for our planners is to connect the existence of electric micromobility services in our city, in our municipalities, with the design of the transport network. Of course, we cannot move the metro network, we cannot move our urban rail network, but we can work on modifying, for example, bus lines. We can work modifying bus lines in order to take into account that electric micromobility services exist. Thus, we can create a transit network design able to take into account also the presence of electric micromobility services. In several tests conducted in the city of Roma, this combined transit network design with new micromobility services brings to convenience in terms of bus fleet, in terms of the increase of average frequency and increase of the loading factor. And moreover, several improvements in terms of working times, waiting times, and average OD travel times for the transit network users. And finally, about bike lanes, thus safety connection of our bike lanes. I told you before that there is the need for an optimal connection of our fragmented bike network. Thus, this is a suggestion, the proposal of a procedure that take into account, for example, the data of electric micromobility operators in order to find the main corridors of demand, and together with the characteristic of the road infrastructure, find the optimal way to connect each single bike lanes. This is another possibility that has been proposed in literature quite recently. And it is interesting because it exploits data of electric micromobility operators. Okay, I would like to finish with this slide because we propose some measures and also models and procedures exist, but also we have funds because about 70% of the funds of our national plan for resilience and recovery and resilience plan are located on the Ministry of Infrastructure and Sustainable Mobility. And I would like to remember that about 36% of this quantity will be located on rail network and about 4% on mass rapid transit system in our capital cities, in our main cities. So solutions are there, methods are there, and we have also funds. Now it's only time to work. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we can go to the last presentation. In this case, we have with us Elena Colli, travel behavior and communication account for Go Mobility. I would like to remember that Go Mobility with Fit Consulting and Iris are currently developing the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan for the Metropolitan City Region of Rome. This speech is about Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan of the Metropolitan City of Rome, planning during the uncertainty of COVID-19.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to this very interesting event. As already said, I am Elena Colli. I am not an engineer. I am a sociologist, as Professor Carrese knows, but I'm here to represent the whole interdisciplinary team of Go Mobility, and especially speaking on behalf of our CEO, Daniele Mancuso, the engineer Daniele Mancuso. So, as already said, Go Mobility is a mobility consultancy company, and we are taking care of the Metropolitan Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan of the City of Rome, Metropolitan City of Rome, sorry. And so our society is coordinating a group of more than 30 professionals working on this plan. So I will try to be brief and clear as we are late. So sorry, we lose the slides. Okay. So what's this speech about? As I already said, I will try to be super quick. So I will start with a general preamble, and then I will dive into the approach that Go Mobility is using for this plan. Then I will show the objectives of the SUMP of the metropolitan area of Rome, and then the data sources, and then I will try to conclude with some insights on the heart of this speech, which is planning during uncertainty. So let's move on and start with some general characteristics of the area analyzed. So let's move on with the slide. So as you can see from the map, the area analyzed includes, of course, the city of Rome, but also 120 municipalities that surround it, as you can see in the map, which counts more than 4 million inhabitants and an area of more than 5,000 square kilometers. So quite complex. And what are we doing in this area? What's our job? We are developing not only the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan of the Metropolitan City, but also a set of other planning tools. So we have the Public Transport Plan, the BC Plan, the Mobility Plan for People with Disabilities, the Sustainable Logistics Plan, and the guidelines for the general territorial plans of the province. So how are we trying to organize the workflow? This is our timeline. We have fixed some milestones, so 3 scenarios. The current one, so we have the 2022 as a baseline, and then we have our first midterm scenario set in 2028, and finally in the year 2035, the long-term scenario as a goal. So how are we organizing the complex workflow of activities? We have grouped the activities in 5 levels of activities. So we have participation, we have the development of the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan and the other sector plans, then the monitoring, the strategic environmental assessment, and the administrative process. These processes are follow at the same path, as you can see from the graph, but they follow a different pace depending on the macro steps that every sustainable urban mobility plan has. So the reduction, the adoption, the approval, and the implementation. So how are we connecting these different plans and activities, and how they are intertwined between each other? At first, we started with the definition of the policy and legal framework. So in this initial moment, we started to formulate with the stakeholders the objectives and targets of the plan. Then these objectives and targets are the basis to build the strategies, which are formulated into the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. And these strategies are translated into sets of actions, of specific actions, into the several sector plans. And all this will be monitored with the monitoring, of course, during the whole period of implementation, with a set of indicators defined from the beginning. And all of this is accompanied by our travel companion, which is the participation plan, so the participation and communication plans, which follows us during all the process, from the beginning to the end. And what's our approach? So speaking about participation, which is my favorite topic because I am taking care of the communication and participation plan, we have started with a main thing, a very important thing, because as you know, as the topic of this event, we have gone through several events in these last 2 years. So as a first step, we needed to refresh the set of objectives. So we invited our stakeholders to reflect, to keep in mind during all the activities a set of changes that occurred the last 2 years, and to keep that in mind during all the activities. So what are these changes? Of course, the pandemic, so all the changes in mobility habits and trends that occurred and that must be considered in the preliminary analysis of the territory, of course, because mobility habits are not the normal, as the normal, and the re-elaboration of the objectives also depending on these changes. But also positive things like the Green New Deal, so the set of new and more ambitious environmental targets set from the European Union that we, of course, need to absorb in our local plans. And the funds, as already mentioned in the last presentation, and so all the funds coming from the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, so more financial resources directly addressed, especially for the digital and environmental transition, and also all the new norms and regulations that occurred in the last 2 years. So, for example, in Italy, the road law reform, the new planning models for the public transport, the stop of combustion engines, which is set in 2035, and so on. What's our approach for the participation process? We followed 3 main approaches, which are often one necessary to the other. So we started with information. So these are sets of events based especially on building a common language and the work method to better work together. Because also we are convinced that these kind of plans are not only a fundamental tool for improve the quality of life, but also an opportunity to learn. So we are learning together with the stakeholders all the things regarding the sustainable mobility and the planning tools. Then the approach of listening. So all the events that are made to incorporate the voices of the people who live and know closely the territory, because we are technicians and we need also the voices coming directly from the territory. So all these kind of encounters are made to, for example, collect all the details for to integrate the SWOT analysis, to reformulate the objectives, and to collect also the proposals of action coming directly from the territory. And the third approach is update and assimilate. So all the things that we say and we do during our encounters needs to be incorporated in the actual plan. So incorporate the change and integrate all the inputs coming from the participation. So what are the effects over time of the participation process? For example, we started with the refreshment and the prioritization of the objectives, and this process has effects on the strategies and action, because as already said, the objectives are the basis to implement the strategies and actions, but also the weight decided in the prioritization process will have consequences during all the duration of the plan, because the weight will be the basis to monitor all the objectives, for example. So some numbers quickly on the participation. Until now, we have organized 32 events with the stakeholders, and we have mapped more than 400 stakeholders, with more than 1,000 registrations to our events, and 5,600 people contacted for our interview, a survey built ad hoc for the mobility habits and preferences. But I will speak about that in a while. Then very quickly, what are these objectives, which we have formulated with the stakeholders? They are 24. I don't want to go into detail because I don't want to bore you, but these 24 objectives are based on the set of minimum objectives which are provided by the ministry, and then integrated with a set of specific objectives which are directly coming from the participation process. So based on the peculiarities and needs that we have collected from the participation process, that you can see underlined in the slide. And we have grouped all the objectives into 5 main areas, which you can see: accessibility, efficiency, development, so on, which are our general objectives, let's say. So I can, maybe if you go to previous slide. So the first is to guarantee the accessibility of people and goods, keeping an inclusive perspective. Then we have efficiency, so to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of all modes. Then we have the development, so to promote local development, ensuring social, economic and environmental sustainability. Quality of living, so to increase the quality of living and the urban environment. And finally, safety, so to increase the safety of roads and vehicles. So let's dive a little bit more into more engineering stuff. So what's our data sources? We have traditional and advanced sources. So let's start with the traditional ones. So what do we mean with traditional? We mean data coming from statistical authorities, for example, ISTAT. Then traffic counting and CATI survey, as I already said. So CATI means, as you probably know, the computer-assisted telephone interview. And what are the strengths of these traditional data sources? The size of the sample, for example, which is very high, for example, for the ones coming from ISTAT, the record of the trip purpose, the broad representation of all transport modes, the possibility to capture the characteristics of the post-COVID mobility, for example, as our survey built ad hoc for the metropolitan city of Rome. And what are the weaknesses? Data are rarely updated. Then we have the partial representation of the daily trip chain, which is often very complex, and poor detail of space and time characteristics of the trip. While the advanced data sources we use are mobile data coming from smartphone, and not also smartphone, but also mobile normal, and the floating car data, which are the data coming from the black boxes installed in some of the vehicles. So what are the strengths of this kind of data? These data are constantly updated. They are have extremely high details of space and time characteristics of the trips. We have the possibility to profile the mobility demand by age, place of residence, and so on. We have the possibility to piece together the whole trip chain. But the weaknesses are that, for example, we have poor information on the transport mode and the poor capacity to track the trip purpose. So what's the secret? Integrate. So we integrate all the data sources because we think that the potentiality of this kind of big data is to integrate with other sources and not to substitute them. So I will go on in detail on this in this last section. So planning during uncertainty. So I will give some detail, if you can go on some preliminary results coming from our different sources of data. So let's start with the mobile network data results, which are data collected in October 2019. So we can say that the trips, the number of trips in the average working day is around 7 million. And the 53% of trips are made on a regular basis, so they are systematic trips. The 42% of people are people that make daily trip chains of more than 3 journeys, so the famous trip chain that I explained before, and that the 14 of trips made by people which are not resident are made by people which are not resident in the metropolitan area, of which 6.5 are from abroad. Then we have the results of the survey, which was more recent because it was carried out in this March. And we wanted to bring some results specifically on remote working because it was kind of interesting. So from the sample, the share of population potentially eligible for remote working and that which is distance learning were 34.7%. So depending on the kind of job which was eligible to remote working. And of which answered that they were actually on remote working the day before the interview, the 10.5%. So looking at this 10.5% that was actually on remote working, we asked how many days they were on remote working, and they were mostly all on full-time smart working or distance learning. As you can see, 74% of people were 5 days a week on remote working. But if we focus only on the workers, so excluding the students and only considering the workers that are eligible for remote working, we can see some interesting results on preferences and expectation. If we look at preferences, so if we ask how many days a week you would like to spend on remote working, we have 73% of people that answer never. So probably they were traumatized by the remote working during the COVID. And but even if there is a good 18% of people that answer they would like to spend 2-3 days a week. And about the expectations, so how many days a week they expect to spend on remote working in the future, we also have nearly 80% of people that think that they want do remote working in their company in the future. So let's move on and let's speak about the multimodal model. So how we obtain origin destination matrix from the mobile network data. So the mobile network, from the mobile network we obtain an overall matrix demand. So the first step is to do data cleaning and processing and identification of peaks period. And then the second step is to estimate the mode choice. So thanks to user profiling that we can make thanks to a combination of variables of the trip and the users, so age or destinations and timetables and so on. We can estimate the mode choice and model split and then calibrate and validate the model. And to understand if the model built is reliable, we check the network flow with traffic counting, and so we correlate. We make correlation analysis between the reality and the simulation. So what we obtain is a matrix, an origin destination matrix for public transport and private vehicles for trip purpose and time slot. So I will conclude this speech with this overview on how we integrate the different data sources and how these different data sources collaborate between each other to better understand reality, which is our goal, of course, as researchers and professionals, especially during these uncertain times. So what we did, the mobility survey was useful to collect data about the changes in the daily mobility routine before and after the pandemic. So we made questions about the mobility before and after, and also the motivations behind these changes. And then what we did was to match the information of these changes and the profiles coming from the mobility survey with the profiles coming from the mobile network data. Matching, the match was made on the trip purpose. So, and also, so the mobility survey was used to enrich and complete the model. But also the model was completed with the information coming from the floating card data and then validated with traffic counting. So you can see how many interaction of data sources are made. And with this integrated approach, so we can estimate the long-term effects of the pandemic and estimate the mobility habits of the future, even if, of course, as you can imagine, is a little bit difficult because to know if our guess is true or not, we have to wait until the data becomes more stable. And with the current situation and the unpredictability of the pandemic and the world in general is very difficult, but in the meantime, we try our best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Also to remember us the importance of the engagement, the public engagement, the engagement with stakeholder. I have a lot of questions about, for example, the matrix and so on, but we are late, so I think that now we can have a little short break of 5 minutes, so we can start. I will try to summarize the inventory, giving more space to comments and discussion during the working group. So 5 minutes, we can see at 11:25 here. Thank you very much. I will try to summarize very quickly. The inventory is a series of questions that has been promoted to the partners for each workshop. In this case, the questions are related to integrated COVID-19 experiences into regional mobility plans. We now are going to analyze the questions and the related answers about all the partners. So the first question Is there any policy document or legislation related to the COVID-19 emergencies that modify mobility planning in your regional policy instrument? If so, please describe them. If not, please show which document or legislation should be influenced by the emergency. The answer is generally no. There is no changes in our planning instrument related to some new policies or regulatory. However, there are several directives, for example, think to smart working, think to European COVID certificate, incentives for soft mobility modes, and all these directives can impact travel demand. Thus, it is expected that they will impact planning. And of course, not only transport planning, but also regional land use and also housing, as for example underlined by Helsinki. And it is interesting that several partners cited that the extension, the result of the Smart MR project can be introduced inside the development and the modification, the impact of mobility planning. The second question, which planning goals are reinforced by the COVID-19 effects? Which ones are weakened? Are there any new goals? So it's clear to the partners that there are some points that remains essential, that are public transport effectiveness, public transport competitiveness, and the need for sustainable and environmental goals. There are several goals that have been reinforced, as also we told before in our presentation, the concept of urban space, land use, walkability, 15-minute cities, micro-mobility, and it's very important, also last-mile logistics solutions. Thus, usually, logistic and freight transport are considered usually at the end of our planning instruments. Instead, it is underlined that last-mile logistics becomes even more important in transport planning and the planning of our urban system. The question number 3, traffic flows and users' behaviors are influenced by the level of spread or containment of COVID-19. Which approach is used to choose measures to contrast COVID-19? Traditional forecasting method, what if? Backcasting approach, what to? Or some hybrid version? Here the answers of the partners are very different. For example, Helsinki and Rome reported about the adoption of what if methods, while other partners reported about the adoption of what to approach, the casting approach. Usually, we know that what if approach is generally applied for planning purpose, but with the increase of uncertainty, as in the case of disruptive events such as COVID, partners think that a mix of what if and what to approaches can be the solution for the future. So the future maybe will implement hybrid approaches. Question number 4, data collected on different types of traffic flows and mathematical modeling of transport systems. Please describe the models used and the model planning tools. Okay, about this question, there is not uniform answer. It's quite difficult to compare the answers of the different city boards. Some of them cited the existence of national models, so focused mainly on the spatial difference of the models. Others about the existence of metropolitan region models. About the method, the type of model implemented, in the case of Ljubljana and Rome, it's clear that it is a 4-steps model, thus a classical transport modeling approach. And also in some cases it is clear that the models are multimodal, while this is a very important point, because if we don't have multimodal models, we are not able to understand the potential shifting between transport models. A general lack of calibration is underlined of the models to take into account the pandemic, and this is generally due to the lack of data. So also in some cases, we noticed that there are data that have been collected during the pandemic period. Some new type of data is Bluetooth and floating car data, while there are also standard data usually adopted for calibration as validation and ticketing data from control cameras, and Barcelona, remember, has the importance of mobility survey. About the tools, only 2 cities reported about the possible adoption of PTV vision. However, Porto only has a trial, and this is important because Porto underlined the lack of human resources able to work with transport modeling. Other cities underline the adoption of general GIS-based model. The last question, good best practices, impact of COVID-19 on current planning experience. And in this case, we find again some answers given by the partners in the question number 2. So I gave again some important goals that have to be that are reinforced by the COVID are urban environment, local mobility, walking and cycling, and again city logistics. It is interesting the greater collaboration between government and the local authorities. It seems that sometimes this relation is missing. And for the city of Rome, it is interesting the recovery of the role of the mobility manager. That she is responsible for the collection of information of commuting trips, thus about information about OT matrices and the promotion of sustainable alternatives in the different activities, universities, agencies, and so on. It is clear to all the partners that we need, and probably we have to work more on this, we need to include uncertainty in our planning approaches. This is still lacking, as there is still space to improve this aspect, especially from a modeling perspective. Okay, so with this summary, I will leave the floor to the working group. Now, for the working group, we have 2 different chairs. We'll start with the first working group. Okay, the first working group is about data modeling tools and planning approaches, future perspectives. We have with us Professor Guido Cantelmo of Technical University of Denmark. And of course, Professor Cantino will chair this working group, and you are invited to make questions, comments. We have a microphone here in the conference room, please see, and for people who is connected abroad, please you can raise your hand using Microsoft Teams. Please, Professor Cantino.
Thank you very much, Maria Elisa. It's a pleasure to be here today for this workshop, actually. I studied in Rome, in Roma 3, so it's really a pleasure to be here today. I'll share my screen so that we can have some initial point for the discussion of this working group. So, can you see my presentation? Yes. Perfect.
Yes.
So the topic of this working group is about data modeling tools and planning approaches, futurist perspective. So as Maria-Lisa mentioned, I would really like to invite this one to be an open discussion. We have prepared a few questions following up the presentation of this morning, but really the idea is to have as much discussion as possible, and especially I would like to invite people from the cities, representatives from the cities, to be as active as possible, because it's very important for us to have these tools applied and to develop them in a way that they can serve the cities. And following this initial point, the first question or point of discussion that we would like to analyze in this working group is planning models. They are always at the center of our discussions. But we know that planning models are the pillar of sustainable mobility. We use them to model many different aspects, from uncertainty. We have been talking a lot today about uncertainty, how resilient our networks are in case of some disruptions, change in mobility habits, how can we promote more sustainable behavior, the impact of new infrastructure when we plan it. And that's really the problem that we always call it the short blanket problem. It's very difficult to have a model that is able to do everything. When we focus on uncertainty, often we underestimate impact on mobility habits. And then the question for everybody is, how do we deal with all of this complexity? And specifically for the cities, it will be, do you have an integrated land use transport model? Well, we have seen some of you have different, some of you have the national one and some of them in the metropolitan one. And how the planning models help in tackling this challenging, and how can we actually improve planning models or make them more effective in tackling these challenges? Anybody maybe from the cities who wants to tackle this point?
Alun and Arusa, raise hand.
Yes, thank you. I would like to introduce our guest from Helsinki region, Mette Granberg from Helsinki Region Transport, participates with us today. She's been working with transport system and planning projects, and also she's very experienced with mobility management, public interaction related projects, and so on. So welcome, Mette, with us. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.
So we are waiting if there are comments of...
Okay, I told that Mette wanted to comment. Maybe you have to unmute her.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Rosa. Nothing to add. Here I am.
Okay, then maybe as you sort of volunteer from Gothenburg, I'll say, can I ask for start maybe to triggering a little bit the question, what is the land use or the transport model that you use, and how, let's say, why did you decide to use this specific transport model rather than something different? If I understood correctly, you use the national transport model rather than a metropolitan model.
Hi, this is Sebastian and Anna from Gothenburg. Hi, do you hear us?
Hi.
Yeah, so we actually we did quite a short reply, I think, to the inventory because at our organization, Gothenburg region, we don't really work with transport modeling or forecasting at all, actually. So our reply or our answers are based on how our transport authorities work, and they're using national modeling. And from what we know, they haven't really changed anything in those models yet due to COVID-19 experiences. Maybe they will over time, but not now.
And if I can then ask just one more question, because in Denmark we also have a national transport model, and I think one of the most, the biggest challenges that I can see in using a national transport model is, of course, modeling micromobility, first last mile. Is this represented in your national transport model, or is still somehow missing?
No, I don't think it's not included today from what we know. But the transport model is basically just forecasting, like they have a base prognosis or a base forecast, which they use for all national transport planning. And it's also used in municipal and regional plans, I would say. However, it has been quite criticized the last years because it is only a forecast. It's not target oriented, but it's forecast oriented, let's say.
And I could also add that I think more the municipalities and perhaps the city of Gothenburg, rather than us at the Gothenburg region, do have other perhaps tools to look at micromobility or bike sharing statistics. And we have one of those e-scooters where it's geo-fenced, for example. And I think there are different ways of planning for smaller citywide transport, and not necessarily the public transport, but the individual transport modes, I would say. So there is a difference between the city planning and regional planning and then national planning. But as we said in our answer, it's the national planning tool that we have.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Then maybe I can actually ask somebody from the city of Budapest if they maybe want to comment on this aspect, because as far as I know, in Budapest actually is the opposite situation. There is a lot of research on mobility as a service, shared mobility, and perhaps what is the experience in Budapest in modeling, in using planning models to assess the impact of this? What are eventually some challenges that are there, if this is the case?
Hi, this is Balázs Fejes from BKK, Budapest. Me personally, I'm not an expert on the transport model, and I can't see any colleagues here from the modeling department, but I can tell you that our transport modeling being used mainly for evaluating some transportation plans, mainly for public transport and for road development or new bridges or something like that, not really for the micro modeling. But this transport model is constantly being developed, as far as I know, and maybe the cycling aspect has been built in the model recently, and also the park and ride, but not really other micromobility aspect. So this model is more or less used for the heavy traffic flows like the road transport and the public transport. Yeah.
I see. And then maybe a general question, and otherwise we can also change from planning models. But the general question then is how is this sufficient at the moment? Or if it's not sufficient, perhaps what do you think is something that is missing right now in planning models and that perhaps should have been developed better in the region? If anything at all. Do you think that actually existing planning models are powerful enough for supporting the type of policy and decisions on the territory that are necessary.
I think we can use the transport model very well, but of course it's not perfect. So we can think about how to develop this model, especially if we are doing the review of our mobility plan, regional mobility plan currently. As we are, for example, evaluating our projects, which is the part of the revision of the mobility plan, we are also using this transport model, and we are evaluating the results of this. So basically every project which can be modeled by this transport model is being modeled and evaluated according to the data gained from this transport model. But I can also add that we have around 250 projects within this mobility plan, and only a small part of the projects can be evaluated really, because either we don't have enough data, or the projects are not really developed so far that we could build into the model, or are not infrastructure projects, or are only measures or some project ideas which cannot be really used.
Thank you. I think that's actually a very important point that actually brings us to maybe one of the next questions that we wanted to discuss today. Well, actually two. One is exactly about evaluation. How can we do better evaluations, and one about data. And perhaps then I will start exactly from this last point. We have seen, of course, the so-called era of big data in the last 20, 30 years now. We have seen a lot of new type of data applied in transportation, applied to any type of analysis. And personally, I've been told many times that we'll not even need planning models in the future because we can use data. And of course, we have seen in the past experience, at least personally, that this is not the case. One among the many type of data that I can think of is mobile phone network data. We can buy them in Italy, in Denmark, in Sweden. And if we try to buy this data, we will have confirmation that this is very representative. We can, for instance, create origin-destination matrices. But then if we want to do any planning, usually these matrices are not really useful because we don't know anything about the background and the socio-demographic behind it. And therefore, there has been actually a lot of push for developing a more structured approach to data, usually by developing data repositories and also systems for integrating different data coming from different sources. Do, let's say, any representative of the cities experience into this direction? And maybe some comment on what did we learn over these past many years in which more and more data became available? What was maybe something good that we learned about this data and something bad that actually didn't work? And how can we share them and integrate them in the let's say, planning of better cities and better mobility? There is, I think, Antonio Comi has one question, one hand up.
Thank you, Guido. Sorry, but I thank you for the cities. I would like to give some comments on the planning models.
Sure.
Sorry because I ended my hands before, but you started with this new one. If I can, don't worry. If I can, I would like to give some comments about that. I think that before to starting with evaluate the opportunity, the feature of the models, we have to start from scenario definition, because as COVID, because I think that one of the lessons that we have from COVID is that it's difficult to plan and to consider in our plans the future scenario. Generally, we know and we define the future scenario according to some indication that we can easily obtain from the past observation. But now we have to study, to investigate how we can plan the future scenario, taking into account that in the future, in 3, 4, 5 years, all can change. And the situation that we have planned to define, to evaluate, is completely changed. Then I think that one of the main tasks that we have to point out is the definition of future scenario, how we can define, which are the main elements that we have to define, because we can define some infrastructure, service, but the context can completely change, as COVID has demonstrated. And then, of course, it's important to have models, but now I think that we have to change and to move to other tools that allow us to take into account the strong uncertainty that we can have in the future, in terms of demand, in terms of the condition, at the border, and so on. This is my main suggestion about it. I don't know if the cities are planning and are investigating how they can define the future scenario that they want to include in the plans, because we have to, which are the scenarios, why this, which could be the situation in the future, according that all can change, and also the pandemic and so on. Thanks.
Thank you. I really agree. There is, I think, maybe one question from Clemens Gostik. Do you want to?
Yeah, it's not a question. I'm just trying. To answer the questions you are posing to contribute to the discussions and everything. So yeah, from Ljubljana urban region, you can imagine that our region has 500,000 of inhabitants, and in overall, the transport model that we are currently still using is the national transport model that has been produced actually quite 6-7 years ago. And with this national transport model, many measures on the national level have been, let's say, implemented. But on the regional scale, I would say that the majority of the OD metrics lately are mostly dealing with the discussions we had a few years ago about expansion of our ring road around Ljubljana. And what I know that the majority of transport models or evaluations are now focused in the railway sector, because there are many infrastructural, let's say, lackages on the railway infrastructure. So they are kind of develop the capacity models for the railways, which of course also include the spatial and land use issues. And about the second question you posed about, let's say, the problems, the lessons learned and good and bad examples. I would say that in Ljubljana urban region, I think that other partners agree, we are still kind of lagging behind in this interlinkaging with transport model with the spatial planning. We are now in the phases that local municipalities, they of course have their own local spatial plans, and we are in the next, let's say, 5 years, we are in the situation where in the regions we also need to prepare regional spatial plans. And what I observe from the data models and the data, such kind of data lake maps that we are keep on receiving, when I observe that when the data are presented, especially on the mobility, and when we have these graphs and nice pictures, sometimes, especially during the COVID times, it happened that those data are already, let's say, past. Sometimes when you receive the data and before you put it into the data analysis and you make some kind of a validation, the situation changes so much and so rapidly in the past year or even past 2 years that sometimes when you have this graphic representation, it's even outdated. So I would say that a good proposal would be, yeah, to have this evaluation as soon as possible and really to try to reflect from the data and sometimes even critically assess them and then go into the land use observations. So that's my input on the discussion. Thanks.
Actually, thank you a lot, and I'll have a follow-up then, of course, for you, but for anybody else also who decide to be involved, which is how often actually do we update these demand models, these planning models? Because at least I think here in Denmark, we update our matrices roughly every 10 years. And of course, we're always wondering what is the implication of working so often with such an outdated model for making analysis of what's happening today. So actually going back to the data and to the link with the modeling, can I ask how often do you, let's say, update your models and actually the demand side of your models? And how often, let's say, how do you see this impacting or how do you consider the impact of this in your, let's say, decisions when you do any type of planning of future scenarios?
Guido.
Yep.
I would like to add some comments about this field. I think that the city, I don't know, around the world, around the Europe and so on, among the partners, it's important to use data not only for example for planning when you have to editing the plan, but it's important for monitoring, for ex-post assessment, because thanks to the opportunity offered by telematics, by the innovative technology, we can monitoring the system and to forecast the reaction, and it's important, and then become very important. One of the core of the planning became the ex-post and the monitoring action, because now we can monitoring and we plan everything, and thanks to the large data. And we can organize, and I think that one of the main tasks should be define a very well monitoring and ex-post action during the planned editing. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Komi. I actually agree absolutely with all of this, and that's the part where all these type of data, I think, all new type of data are important, let's say, the monitoring aspects, but then of course, we are linked to the fact that monitoring is important, but then we need to be able to exploit whatever, to act as a consequence of whatever we are monitoring. And that's for me something that I'm always very curious to see how the cities react when there is this when there is some significant deviation from whatever we monitor, if we are managing to monitoring in the first place. Granberg, Mette? Yeah, thanks.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to comment on you asked how often do we update our model. I'm not a model expert myself, but we do our extensive travel survey every 5 years. So that works as the basis for the model. So now I'm hearing myself. Okay. We updated the data every 5 years. But of course, during this pandemic and during our planning rounds, we also do different scenarios. Was it in Gothenburg that you were criticized for using the kind of like the current situation as a basis? We've also been criticized for that, but the model itself would allow to do different kinds of scenarios, and it does, and we do that. It's just that the model people, they are a bit maybe reluctant to do different kinds of scenarios because they will want to know that what will they be used for. I've been asking for different kinds of, like, could we, for example, put some kind of a really huge modal share for walking and cycling and see how well the transport system would work. But they are not that eager to do like that kind of imaginary scenarios. But yeah. I answered your question and then I said something else that you did not ask for. But
well,
anyway.
That's great. That's the idea of the discussion, right? Well, then maybe one question becomes what is the reason for this resistance? It can be that they are afraid of the results of the model being used for something that they perhaps don't consider to be a realistic output, actually.
That's probably true. Yeah, that's probably so. And also that if you put out results like that, they can spread in places and be misunderstood and everything. So yeah, I understand that they are careful with that. But yeah, thank you for explaining their thinking to me.
I assumed. There was maybe one question, I think from Fabio.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted just to share my view about this question of data uncertainty that seems to be a very crucial point in many of the presentations that we have seen. So you know that I'm working especially with models and algorithms for design and management. And in order to deal with uncertainty that we know is there in optimization, what we typically do is to try to define what we call a robust model. So a model that is able to handle the uncertainty and to provide design solutions that are resilient, that are resistant to changes in the data, even substantial deviation. So yeah, I wonder if this is a solution that should be more widely adopted to try to accommodate models that can deal a priori with substantial differences in the input or in the scenarios that they must face. So dropping the idea of a reference scenario and getting a solution for that scenarios, and instead, a robust model that can handle a large set of scenarios of uncertainty.
Thank you, Fabio. Well, personally, I think that's definitely. Actually, I'll let somebody else talk. Well, Irma, I cannot pronounce your name correctly. I'm sorry.
No, Irma Karan, I'm from Helsinki Metropolitan Region.
Sorry.
I was just, thank you. I was just wondering that we are talking about uncertainties, and this data we are talking about, this is the traditional data of what we get from the vehicles moving on the streets and people in the vehicles. But I would just ask, addressing to the previous speakers who were talking about the uncertainty we are living in. We do know that the economy of the municipalities of the metropolitan regions will be going down. We have less money for investing to public transport, and I was just wondering that do we have enough data of this socio-economic analysis to find out what will be the future opportunity and possibilities, economical possibilities for the inhabitants to move on, use public transport or public or private cars or the micro-mobility. That actually I would ask more information about the personal economy for the people we expect to move around the city. What are the abilities to use public transport? Where are they located in terms of access to public transport? And as we see during the COVID, those people with less economic strength are those who should use public transport. And in our case, we have a reduced amount of public transport because of the crisis of public transport financing after COVID. So the big question is actually, how would we better combine the personal behavior of those people using and their economy in this future prognosis, that it's not just about how do we invest on roads and or trains, but see what the people want to do with less money to be available, and how do they get to those places they want to go as cheap as possible. Very simple question.
Not so simple. Anybody maybe from the audience wants to comment? I think that's... Fabio, your hand is up. I'm not sure if it's from the previous point. Well, personally, I can try to answer myself and perhaps being supported by others. I think that one important argument is there was a recent study done in the Netherlands, and they were showing that the number of trips done by car now is back to the levels of before pandemic, but the congestion is not. Which means that basically because of the new condition of basically smart working and working from home and having additional flexibility, people are changing their habit, which doesn't mean that they are moving less. And I think, and I'll actually let maybe talking Janet Snaret, whose hand is up, but I wanted just to make the point that we have to remember that people will keep moving and they will just change the way they budget, basically, they spend their mobility budget, let's call it this way, I believe.
Sorry, I won't make an answer. I will just complicate it even more than Irma did. Actually, what we are talking about in the context of mobility planning is the time perspective. We speak about the transport and spatial planning and how to connect them. And already in traditional way, we have different time perspectives. Spatial planning is always long-term perspective. Mobility planning can be quite different in terms of different trends that we are facing in the several years before. So there is always a question of flexibility of planning and how adaptive can be, or how can we set objectives that are up to date in the political process, in the planning process, and in the daily implementation. So from this perspective, quality of data are really important input for decision making. But I think that we have to search for more flexible planning that would be responsive to all the needs that can be short-term, can change because the objectives can change considerably from time to time. And there is always the question whether the objectives that we set 2 or 3 years ago are still valid. Has the COVID changed the objectives we have for mobility or special planning in terms of remote work, smart work, and new modes of transportation? We heard today about the micromobility that was not on the agenda 4 or 5 years ago. So the situation is developing quite quickly, and that's why we have to be responsive. Sorry, I didn't provide answers. I just raised the question.
No, thank you so much. And actually, I will move then to the next question and try to also comment on this. And of course, I hope somebody else also wants to comment, because this is the type of questions I think we want really to have in this type of discussion rather than solutions, because we know we have some solutions, but they are not working all the time. So there were 2 questions related to this. Let's say one, I am going to skip it. I'm sorry, Maria Lisa, is about simulation, but as we didn't have a lot of activities about planning, maybe we can, this is a little level of detail that we don't need. And instead, I would like to focus on something that already popped up several times into this discussion, which is planning control, or more in general, key performance indicators. Even if we assume that we do manage to monitor what's happening, and if we do manage to define some scenarios, and we do manage to include uncertainty, of course, we have to assess our solutions against something. And this is even more important in a world that is changing. So we have just said people have less money for moving, or in the sense the mobility budget is changing. The mobility budget is also changing. Our mobility habits are becoming more complex. And my personal actually takeaway on this comment of how people move is that what changed in the past is that we always have these 3 levels of the decision. We call them strategic, long term, medium term, short term. And the point is that what before was a medium term planning. Maybe we could assume that certain decisions were constant for maybe 5 years. Now this is not very true at all. Now new mobility services like e-scooters, sometimes they don't even last 5 years. Some companies in 5 years have the boom and then they fail. So our habits change much faster than every 5 years, probably even every 2 years. So how can we really not just solve the problem, but how can we define in which direction, if we are at least moving in the right direction with the type of operations that we are doing? And how actually, maybe it's important, the municipalities decide how to measure the targets that they are setting up for the future, for the future mobility, for achieving these sustainable mobility targets. I think Janice, the hand is up, but probably from before. Maybe from the, if I can ask somebody who didn't talk until now, the city of Rome, if there is some comment about, let's say, how we can tackle this, or at least how can we currently address the issues of key performance indicators and assessing if we are moving towards the right targets or not.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this very valuable conference. The answer to your question, to this, the last one, is yes. We designed 2 different sets of indicators, both for the general traffic plan we adopted in the past in 2015. That is shown on the left side of the slide. So these are indicators that are related basically to transport supply and to demand. So we use, as has been said very brilliantly in the past presentation, we use all the type of data to monitor the implementation process of the general traffic plan, and we adopted in the last year also the PUMS, the sample, as in English is named, and in the right part of the slide has shown the indicator that more or less are related to monitor the implementation of on the plan, and are related to data that in each case are more are wider, because it's a longer term plan, so we need to monitor also how the plan is able to change modal shift, hopefully towards more sustainable transport modes. So the answer is yes. Trying to give a comment to the previous questions. I hope that COVID it's only a parenthesis in this in our life. So we I hope, and I think that in the near future, more or less we will back to previous mobility habits. What COVID has boosted is the, for example, the remote working, and I think that this will more or less remain also in the near future. So the overall level of demand more or less is a little bit lower than before, and will stay in this level also in the next future. The fact that, as you was saying before, we are more or less the same level private cars traveling around the city is a fact, and the congestion is quite low, quite lower than before. This because there is more flexibility during the day, so I can decide to work from home and at a certain time stop my work period and going to school to keep to bring my son and coming back. So as a overall, I make at least also more than the 2 trips that I made before, but on a wider time period than before. So this is very important. And the last note I take before that I think that COVID-19 has changed a little bit the way we designed the city. So has boosted a little bit how we organize, for example, a road platform, giving more attention and more space to pedestrian and cycling mobility. This is my experience, especially in the city of Rome.
Thank you, actually, a lot for all this insight. I think we're almost running out of time, unfortunately. I'd like to invite maybe the last, just one last comment from AMP, if we can unmute.
Yes, hello. I'm Carmen from Port City.
Yeah.
And what has been our big problem with the thing of COVID and the planning process is that in this moment, all the municipalities contest our planning. And we have a public transport contest in tribunal for public buses. And the reality is our studies. Everybody contests our economic studies and how we finance the public transport, because until today, we usually know what is going to happen. And now what everybody says, you don't know. You don't know if there are people to go on public transports. And the problem is like, if there are no people, who is going to pay? Do you have the financing and things like that? And this has been a big problem for us, because we don't know where we get the finance. We don't know what the government will do, and we know that the municipalities don't want to have the responsibility for paying the public transport. So, in the big problem of our planning, the part that is regional, we are responsible by the buses, because the railways are responsibility of central government, and the micro mobility is responsibility of the municipality. So we have different levels and we work together. But the big problem is and certainly makes the problem of the financing the public transport. And so it's our big issue.
Thanks. I think that's actually very important issues. The threat was analyzed a lot at the beginning. The threat of the COVID-19 was for public transport in this sense. Unfortunately, I think we have to close. That's I was told. But I would really like to thank all the speakers, all the people who contributed to the discussion. Yeah, for me, it was a lot of insights. So thank you really a lot. And thank you again for allowing me to join today and to assist this interesting work.
Thank you, Professor Cantelmo. Yes, thank you again to all the partners and people that discussed with us about data, models, KPI, and so on. We now are continuing with the discussion, and we are changing the shape. Now the second working group is about new planning goals for regional mobility. The chair is Fabio Giovanni, first-class research scientist of CNRS UTC Sorbonne. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Maria Lisa. And yeah, as the purpose of the second working group, of the second discussion, was to lighten up a little bit the the situation passing to more lighter questions and to discuss at a higher level some of the topics that we have considered today. Skip it. So this series of slides were like conceived like by giving a general topic, proposing an extract from some scientific work, and then propose you a question to start the discussion, and then accompany it with some kind of supporting figure. So one of the first topic that we identified was about the land use question. And essentially, we started by seeing this recent paper by Pan and A about the situation after the lockdown, in which users have experienced a recovery of travel frequency, but less recovery of the activity space. And so there was the effect of having more short-distance travels rather than long-distance travels. So the question from which we wanted to start is, do you think that metropolitan regions should tend more to a compact city or to a sprawling city? Let's better visualize these two concepts by giving two very evident different cases. On the left, you can see the case of Paris, that is like a very densely inhabited city with all the deriving problems. And on the right, instead, this city of Uberlândia in Brazil that instead is really, really sparse. So we would like to know what is your opinion about what could be the future, what could be the more, let's say, at the same time, more sustainable situation, and also more going towards the goal of the 15-minute city that we have discussed many times today. See if there is some ones that want to ask. Okay.
Yes.
That's narrative. To you the word.
Actually, in the project we have discussed this issue quite broadly, and one of the extensions of the project was also discussion of station area concept, where actually we combined the transit-oriented development and concept of, let's say, 10-minute city or station areas concept that they have in Nordic countries. And of course, these objectives, those suggestions haven't changed. There are, of course, issues connected to COVID, remote work and some others, but main objectives, I think, are the same. And the idea is to follow the polycentric structure of the city that would allow development of station areas, or let's say 50-minute cities along the transport corridors, and that's why, and this would be the way how to connect the region, how to improve the mobility infrastructure, and support it with services and also jobs. So the concept was developed, and I think it's still valid. Of course, there might be some adaptations due to COVID experiences and the rise of micromobility and similar forms, but I think, I hope other partners agree, this still could be a concept for further development. Thank you.
And I was asking to the people, to the representatives of the city halls of the other cities, in particular, where they think their cities are moving to. So whether to more the compact model or to the sprawled model, in particular referring to the newly built districts. So, for example, I would ask in particular to the colleagues from Oslo, whether this has been to the Norwegian colleagues, where we are going in that country. Karja, Laine, and Irma. Okay.
I'm actually from Finland, from Helsinki metropolitan region.
Yes.
And I would say that if you think of those two examples you had, if you think of the good city which is vibrant, livable. There are a lot of services. There's a good business environment. We have never heard about that second city with urban sprawl, which you are showing. Or doesn't it only show that if the city wants to be a success story, that there will be economic activity, it will be a good space for businesses, for services, it has to be dense. In the other example, where the money goes, it goes for the roads, for the cars. Each family needs to have at least 2 cars to be able to survive in that urban sprawl. So there's no economy to build joint economically wise environment. So in Helsinki metropolitan region, I can clearly say that Helsinki is growing quite rapidly, and the polycentric development is the key. That there are the urban centers close to the railway stations, which are the key development areas. But urban sprawl as such, shown in the second example you had, is just an issue we don't want to have, because it doesn't increase the livability of the city. It doesn't increase the opportunity to address the economic challenges we are going to have in the future. That kind of urban sprawl will be just a disaster for the municipalities. If you just think of the services, infrastructure services, and services for public transport, we can't afford it. As simple as that. Those cities we have heard about, those are dense health cities, as Copenhagen, Paris, and these which are in with the Smart MR project.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Irma. And does anyone else want to share? Oh, I see. We do.
Yeah, I mean, I, of course, not a city, but a representative of the city, but I can say something that we have seen here in Copenhagen as a big opportunity and problem, as actually, when we think about shared mobility, exactly the problem that they are successful to a certain extent in the very densely urban areas, but it's very difficult to bring them outside the urban area to develop basically a more homogeneous offer of mobility services. And even when these mobility services are bring outside the urban areas, there are additional problems that are not easy to solve. For instance, we have bring the car sharing outside the city center in areas that are not densely populated, and still people don't use it. We have e-scooters and still people don't use it for first last mile mobility. And we find out that the main reason is actually urban development. People don't like the area, and therefore they still prefer to go to the to basically take their car, even when the services are available, which I think is always an important aspect to remember anytime we talk about these things, that of course urban planning, urban development, and planning mobility services have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, we might see not so successful stories.
Thank you for sharing this. It's very interesting indeed. Okay. Okay, maybe we can. Yeah, okay. Yes, Balázs.
Yes, hello. I'm Balázs Fejes from Budapest, BKK. And in Budapest, we also have the problem of the urban sprawl, that a lot of people are moving out of the city because they want to have some green space, some private gardens and so on. Especially in the COVID times, this has evaluated a lot to have a private space and not being together with the others. And there are also some plans of the national government to develop the public transport between the city and region, because these are very poorly developed or not well developed. But the problem is, if we would have a very good S-Bahn system, so to say, or a rapid rail network, then this will increase the willingness for people to move out of the city, because this would be then easier to come into the city or to commute. So this is also an interesting aspect, I think, which we have to think of.
And do you know if there is any plan to support the construction of this suburban railway, like S-Bahn, as you were saying, for in the future?
The national plans are there to make this S-Bahn network develop the capacity and the frequency of the trains. But if there will be enough money, then they will do that. If not, they will only doing partial developments on some lines and with some vehicles. But I mentioned if this plan would be realized, which is actually to be planned, then this would also support this urban sprawl aspect.
Okay, thanks. Okay, then I see Conil de Azpiazu.
Yes, hello, good morning.
Please.
Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm representing here the Barcelona metropolitan area. My colleague Jordi Jove, who is following the project, couldn't attend today, and I'm here. And regarding this topic, I just want to point out what Balas also have said, that the important here is to find the good balance between supply and demand, because we have lived a pandemic, and of course this also affects our daily lives, and the demand for citizens of living outside the city in more greener areas and so on. It difficults a lot the land uses and the land prices, and also the provision of public services, including mobility services and others, of course. So that's a challenge for metropolitan areas, who have to manage at the same time big dense cities and also sprawl areas where all mobility services has to be connected, and to assure that daily trips to commute has to be not more than an hour trip. So yeah, just to point out that there are situations where we combine different kind of cities in the same territory, and that's a big challenge to manage.
Thank you for sharing. Okay.
Actually, I just wanted to comment on the situation in Slovenia when you asked about the urban sprawl and the plans for the future. So speaking for the entire Slovenia, there was a quite huge urban sprawl in the last 40 years, let's say. But at the moment, the Ministry is for Infrastructure is financing a research project on how to develop a transit-oriented development, and the concept we have developed in the Smart MR project, and how we can apply it on the level of Slovenia. So we are trying to develop corridors with station areas that are following the principles of that they have sufficient services of general interest, that they have that they are growing in terms of the population, that they have sufficient jobs, and the sufficient provision of the transportation. And in addition to this, we are going to develop a mobility as a service system that would support actually these station areas with or connect these station areas with the hinterland or the countryside close to them, which is typical for Slovenian population system or settlement system. So there is a plan to focus more on the corridors in the near future.
Thank you. One last slide, or okay, the active modes. Okay, so the second question that we identified was related to the increase of and spread of active modes, starting from some observation of a very recent paper of Rivas Serebrisky. So active modes are related especially to cycling and walking in cities, and as many scientific works have highlighted, they contribute to increase the physical activity of people during daily life. So clearly leading to health benefits. At the same time, they are also very good for the cities because they are able to reduce traffic congestion, noise, and air pollution, and also to promote more compact, cohesive, and livable communities. So now, the question, of course, is, do you think that incentives promoting more the adoption of active modes could be a crucial way to, again, leading into the modern metropolis of the future with higher standard of quality of life and so on? Here you can see this image that is from a recent survey that was made for the Bristol area in the UK about involving the local community in discussing incentives for walking and cities into districts of Filton and Brentry. So in some sense we are reconnecting connected this to what was said by Elena Colli about involving the local communities into promoting this new kind of, well, not new, but very sustainable ways of moving across the city. So I invite again someone to share his experience, and maybe I wanted to ask to Dr. Colli whether it was hard to involve the local communities in this kind of discussion, just to warm up the conversation.
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, actually, we had more participation than we thought, because actually the participation was quite good, but sometimes it was difficult to engage the municipalities. And when we were thinking about why, we understood that there is still some confusion or, I don't know, some problems regarding the metropolitan identity. So often the municipalities, or also the municipality of Rome, the municipalities in the sense of the local administrative units, were confused, like, I don't know if I have to participate in this because I'm already writing my sustainable urban mobility plan of my municipality, or so there was like this confusion about the identity of the metropolitan plan. So we find this as a main challenge. So also during the participation process, what we are doing is also to build a community, because it's clearly not integrated in this moment. They do not communicate with each other, and so one of the goals of the participation process is also to build a consolidated community and to make them recognize each other and build something that will still work over time. So that's one of the challenges.
That's very interesting. I would have expected exactly the opposite, with the municipality very active and less participation by people.
That was a surprise for us too, because we expect maybe the municipalities coming groups and asking for things, because that's what they do, no? But instead they were a little bit confused. We had to call them. We had to to stimulate their participation, because they were a little bit I don't know, but like I don't know if I have to be here. I don't know if I have to call the mayor or the I don't know, the councillor. Or so we're a little bit confused. So there is a lot of work to do in the metropolitan area, because in Italy we have still some confusion about this.
This entity.
Yes.
Thanks. And any other questions, maybe from the online colleagues, about the active modes question, or this topic of the participation? Carmo, Tovar?
Yes. In the city of Porto, in the metropolitan region of Porto, we see the micromobility more like a last mile solution. we see much more active modes in our metropolitan region, but we have also lots of complaints of older people saying that we are changing the way people move, and they need to have a space too in the cities, because great part of the active modes are active and are not so good for older people. So it's something that we, in our planning, we see more like last mile solutions.
Thanks. Okay.
Yes. Maybe we can go to the last question about logistics.
Okay, about the freight transport. Okay,
Yes.
if we have time, that's
Only, yes, about
okay.
this last one could be interesting. Yes.
It's about, in particular, yes, about the situation of the freight transport in cities, and I would like to show you directly the image because it has been taken from the city of Barcelona, where because of the congestion that urban freight activities had in recent times, especially because of the COVID and the increase in the e-commerce, a solution that was adopted, that was proposed and adopted in Barcelona, was to create this system, this galaxy of micro deposits, and use this cycle-based delivery in order to reduce the number of motored vans that are congesting street and creating pollution problems, and also avoid the creation of very large delivery hubs inside the city. And so here it would be very interesting to have your opinion, your view about this, whether this could be a very promising solution to promote a more sustainable e-commerce delivery that, as you know, is a very big question at the moment. Particularly, this could be interesting for the colleagues from Barcelona. And okay, seems no question. Okay.
If I can add some
Yes.
comments, Fabio, on this point, I read that in Italy we are thinking to use all the kiosk of papers, of newspapers, in order to change them to micro-logistic hubs and integrate it with, for example, cargo bikes or something like this. And also there is some project, I don't remember if in Ireland or something like this, in the north of Italy, to modify also some old phone cabin to little parcel lockers in order to move freight in the downtown, in the city center.
Yes.
So I think this is something that in the short, medium time we will have also in our capital cities at least.
This is very interesting, and I can tell you that at least in the optimization community, currently the design of these micro delivery networks are an extremely hot topic with a lot of papers and collaboration that are coming out. So again, I think it would be a very good occasion for promoting cross-disciplinary collaboration in this. Okay. So if there are no other questions...
It's a pity that there is less discussion when we talk about logistics. It means that we have to work more on this aspect. Okay, there is a comment.
Actually, if I may, I would just say that we discussed the question of city logistics and the consequences of COVID on the second EU workshop. So all the answers are actually collected in the inventory for the second workshop, just for those who are interested in this topic.
Okay, thank you, Fabio.
Thank you, yeah.
So I think that now we can move to the wrap-up and conclusion. I invite in the podium Professor Ernesto Cipriani.
Okay, so can you hear me? Okay. So thank you very much, Maria Lisa, for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here and have the chance to summarize the interesting experiences and the stimulating ideas that today emerged, and also to have the chance to make conclusions on lessons learned from the pandemic experience related to mobility plans. I do not have slides, so I took some notes also from the presentation of today, and I promise I will not keep you here too long, but just to summarize what we have discussed. So we can start from the first presentation from my colleague, Marco Petrelli, and in my opinion, we can say that we learned from that presentation. Well, I know well that presentation because I was part of the team that worked together with the Rome Mobility Agency during the lockdown period. So I know that experience very well. And as Marco has highlighted, some key points can be generalized. The first one is that the pandemic emergency highlighted the importance, as was said also in other presentations, highlighted the importance of accurately monitoring both the transport demand and the transport supply. So this is one important point. Maybe we can think that it's quite obvious, but it's important to stress. And as also Marco said, it's important to stress that we have to monitor, we have to know what we are working for. Of course, in order to accurately monitor a system, whatever it is, we need to accurately collect the data. As we know, now we are in the era of big data, as several advanced technologies are available and are able to collect several heterogeneous type of data. So we have a big availability of data. It's important to integrate this type of data, as we used to say, to fuse them in order to gather, to take the real richness into the data. Otherwise, as some other persons used to say, too much information becomes no information. So we have to be able really to integrate those data in order to take the richness which is inside that data. And this is important because we can, with this data, from one side, to take an accurate snapshot of what's going on our network, and on the other side, because this data represents the input data with which we can feed our advanced simulating and forecasting models that can support us in the design phase. Using the data and the models, we can try to be sure that our design solutions are really effective. The experience that we had in Rome was said to forecast day by day the average passenger load on the transit network, mainly on the metro one, in order to guarantee the compliance with the social spacing. And in my experience, in my opinion, such experience should be further strengthened. As now everybody of us more and more are all oriented towards sustainability. We are talking about this type of plans from taking advantage of normative tools, and also in these days I think that the earth is telling us that we have to move towards that direction. So the direction is the sustainability. Maybe there are several ways that we can take to move along that direction. In my opinion, it's difficult to say which is the best way to follow, but whatever it is, it's important to take it, because no other options are feasible, in my opinion. So we have to take one way, one road along that direction. And even if it is not the best one, okay, and it is very difficult, it's always difficult in a transport sector to say which is the best option. Also, according to what we said, and I will recall in a little while, it's even more difficult now to say which is the best option. But whatever it is, the way that we take along that direction, it's important to start the trip and then, as said, to monitor any single step that we do in order to be sure, as said, that our solutions are really effective. Try to be effective. Maybe that are not as much effective, but at least they do not worse, okay, the system. And I think that, again, resulting from that experience, I would like to stress something that, again, it can be quite obvious, but it's important to stress in my point of view. And I think that talking about sustainability cannot ignore public transport. Public transport has, in my opinion, to represent the backbone, of course, of an integrated multimodal transport system, but any serious sustainable policy must recognize that its backbone is the, I would say, even traditional public transport, metro, rail public transport. In any context, mainly for sure in the urban one. So we have to keep in mind this. Again, I would say it's quite obvious, but it's important to stress this. And then, as we know, there are some transformations, technological and digital, of course, that have already started and that are making available new transport modes, or at least are changing the ways for using some transport modes. And in this case, I'm referring mainly to the second presentation from Maria Elisa on micromobility. And we can discuss whether such transformation are a revolution or an innovation, but whatever they are, there are new concepts, new mobility paradigms, new attitudes towards transport modes, especially in young generation. For instance, with respect to my generation, the possession of a means of transport is no more seen as it was for my generation. So young generation are replacing the possession with the idea of use of a means of transport, better if in a shared and integrated way. And this, in my opinion, if we start from the backbone, public transport, but then we add also this sharing, for instance, which is already somehow it's already a reality, a reality that has already started. I will talk in a little while about other trends that are still to come. But a trend that has already started is sharing. And this has allowed us to start from the backbone to talk about a new concept of public transport or integrated public transport, which is the, as we know, again, mobility as a service, MaaS. But again, this is something very challenging that I will talk in a little while. Of course, MaaS represents a challenge which is characterized by a certain amount of uncertainty, because in my opinion, this is my opinion, everybody talks about MaaS, but we do not know exactly what it will be, what it is, maybe that it is still nothing, what it will be. And unfortunately, according to my small experience on MaaS, everybody is mainly worried about how to make different systems, different services, different operators to communicate, which is, of course, something important. But I'm a transport engineer, okay? I work here in this department. used to approach the systemic side of a problem, and therefore I cannot think that MAS is only a communication digital problem. It's much more. Maybe that for sure I don't know exactly how much it is more, but for sure it is more. No doubt about this. So I was saying this MAS introduces a certain amount of uncertainty, and so I come to the third presentation that has dealt with the uncertainty provided by the pandemic, somehow related to the pandemic. And this uncertainty, I like to call it a scenario uncertainty, because it's due to something which is exogenous to the, in this case, pandemic, is exogenous with respect to the transportation system. And as many experts say, and some of us knows, pandemic has been called as a black swan, okay, that has completely upset the reference inputs. And this is something that also in the presentation that we have heard, that we attended, we have understood what has happened during the lockdown, for instance, but even in the restarting phase during the first weeks of May 2020, in my opinion, we had the chance to observe a big size, real size laboratory test. And we can use our models to do backcasting, okay, to see if they work, but in a backcasting way, not in the normal forward way. So that has represented a situation where the inputs were completely different with respect to those that we usually use for feeding our models. And unfortunately, we are now living another uncertain scenario due to what is occurring in the middle of Europe right in these months. So in such situation, we have to deal with completely different inputs to feed our models, and also some answers today in my, I think that have arrived, but I think that we are still wondering how, when, where, whether we will recover from the pandemic, real recovery. If we will go back to the previous normal, or if, as we already said, a new normal will represent the new reference, but it will be a new normal. And I think that it is very likely, in my opinion, that this will be the case, as new habits, as said, new habits in life and working have emerged due to the pandemic. Smart working and e-commerce, just to mention two of them, but that have been much accelerated due to the pandemic, okay? I don't know, it is somehow questionable whether these two options are somehow oriented to sustainability. Maybe the first one, yes, smart working, while e-commerce, it is more controversial, okay? But in any case, these two options now are there, are on the table, are on the field, and we have to include them in our models. There is no doubt about this. But, and here we come to another problem, we may wonder whether our models are suited to properly take them into account. And this is, in my opinion, another brick towards uncertainty. So other than scenario uncertainty, we have also somehow modeling uncertainty related to our normative and technical tools. as said, new lifestyles and habits have to be included in the models. And we have already talked about public engagement, and in my opinion, it's important to have the consultation with stakeholders, with public engagement, also somehow to try to cope with these new variables that are emerging. So I think that it can be useful also in this field. This is something which is somehow related to our reality, to the current scenario, our new current scenario. But if we look at the future, okay, this is even more challenging because, as we know, there are some fast-moving trends that are shaping our mobility and that will have a disruptive impact on the transport, mainly on the road transport, but not only on this. And of course, I'm referring to the sharing, we already said, automation, connectivity, sharing, and then decarbonization. Okay. Some of them are ahead of others, as said, as we know, and so we can start to monitor, to observe their impact on the transport sector, on mobility. For others, we have a deadline, and I'm referring to the recent European ban to sales of the endothermic cars starting from 2035 as part of the Fit for 55 program. Others, in my opinion, are still to come if we exclude the lower levels of automation that are already on board on our cars. In both cases, we know that change will happen for sure, as they are part, if we think about decarbonization, they are part of the sustainability that we have to pursue, to go forward towards. But we do not know exactly, at least for some of them, which is their economic, technical, physical impact. What we know, in my viewpoint, is that such change will involve the whole transportation system. So I go back to what I was saying about mass. It's important to have, in my opinion, it's important to have a comprehensive approach. And I think that our tools, normative and modeling tools, allows us, despite they have to be, it's likely that they have to be updated, maybe even upgraded, not only updated, upgraded, okay? But I think that they represent the only option that we have in order to face such challenges in a systemic way. Another important point that have emerged in the presentations are the funds that now are available. As we know, Next Generation EU, referring at the European level, okay, is the main medium to long-term financial scheme to respond to the pandemic. And it relies on something that we have already mentioned, transition, digital and green transitions, which can be summarized in the term smart mobility. But smart mobility, as I like, and as expected, recognize public transport as the backbone of a multimodal integrated system, where vehicle fleets have to be renewed and optimized, and mobility must be shared and integrated with micromobility. So what I can read about the smart mobility, well, I also teach smart mobility, but what I can read on smart mobility is exactly what I expect from a systemic approach for the transport sector. In conclusion, we know that pursuing sustainability is the only alternative that we have now, and that this must be done effectively. We have to do this despite the fact that there are many elements of uncertainty, both exogenous to the transportation system, such as pandemic, and endogenous, such as decarbonization, automation, and so on, that are changing the performance of the system. These elements, on one hand, required strengthening the knowledge of the state of the system, and thus monitoring its performance, as we said, both ex ante and ex post, so that our tools, our proposals become really effective. On the other side, such elements of uncertainty pose new challenges to us and to our normative and modeling tools, technical tools, but also at the same time, they pose some opportunities. The extent of which is still unknown, at least to me, okay, but certainly impose, as I said, the adoption of a systemic approach. Updated and upgraded, okay, as I said, that our tools are, in my opinion, suited to do. Also taking advantage of the relevant funds that now are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ciubiani. I would like to thank you all the partners, all the stakeholders, all the persons that are here with us. We are 15 minutes late with respect to the schedule, but I hope it was a fruitful time, a fruitful workshop here with us, partially virtually in Rome, and I think every one of us hope to see the other ones in the short term in presence in some cities. Thank you again to all of us. Thank you.